Jumping back into the action now here on Friday, February 7th, here at the end of the week. And we're going to continue our series that we've had for the last few days now, talking about some early improvements that we can identify for every team in the NFL. We're going to go through all of them as the days go by. And we're on the Minnesota Vikings this time around because I missed out on them when I was talking about the NFC North. I forgot to include them, so I skipped over them. So we're circling back around and talking about the Vikings today. So despite all the uncertainties coming in around Minnesota this year, mainly around Sam Darnold, right? Because that's a huge piece at the quarterback spot. They certainly, despite Sam, right, excluding him, they certainly proved tons of people wrong this year with how great they played, and just the idea that they were always just so consistent. Yeah, they had a couple games that we would have liked back, that I'm sure they would have liked back as well. But for the most part, staying in that range of competing for the number one seed and staying, kind of step for step for with the Lions was something that I don't think should just be kind of brushed over, right? The Lions were killing people this year, but despite that, the Vikings kept pace with them pretty well. And the team overall was well built. There was a lot of great performances. The defense played great with Brian Flores at the helm, but also bringing Sam Darnold back into this discussion. Right, he had a career year, one of the best. They had one of the best records in their division, one of the best records in their conference, and getting the most out of Sam was definitely a big achievement. Because again, this is a guy that everybody thought was just going to be a backup quarterback for the rest of his career, right? And he lands in Minnesota, not a lot of expectations, right? A lot of the buzz is around JJ McCarthy, and then it's devastating when he gets hurt. Now Sam is going to have to play, and he exceeded all expectations. So they had a great year overall. Yes, it didn't end how they wanted it to, right? Losing the way they did in the playoffs to the Los Angeles Rams, but um, I wanted to focus on the two spots I feel like they could upgrade the most to still, despite the loss and despite this end of the season, still be in a good spot to kind of continue it next season. And I could have put quarterback in here, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen with Sam, but I think I think that answer's kind of limited and narrowed down to JJ McCarthy's either going to play quarterback or they're probably going to bring Sam Darnold back anyway. So I wasn't going to talk too much about it because I didn't think there was that many options, right? It's going to be one of the two, I feel like. So, yes, quarterback is one, but overall, I think the next two are a little bit more important. And yeah, I mean, the first one I wanted to talk about is their secondary because this secondary could look very different next year, right? With their top four defensive backs are currently free agents. They're going to be free agents once March hits. So their best four defensive backs are not going to be there, and their two starting safeties also are on expiring deals as well. So that's quite literally all of their secondary players are going to be on the market. And guys like or a guy like Byron Murphy seems to be the most likely to return. At least it's the one that I would negotiate with first to make sure that he definitely doesn't leave. But guys like Shaquille Griffin and Stephon Gilmore are also going to be testing the market, and they're more of a toss-up, right? I don't know how strong the Vikings feel about bringing back a older Stephon Gilmore and a Shaquille Griffin that I mean, wasn't terrible, but I don't know. It's not a guy that I'm sure they're prioritizing too much, or at least I'm not quite sure about it. So those are more of a toss up there. And also, you look at their two safeties and their longtime veteran captain player Harrison Smith is set to be a free agent, and what kind of discussions are they going to have there with him? I don't think he's considering retirement, but I'm not quite sure. And then also their other starting safety, Cam Bynum, is going to be a free agent as well. So all of their secondary has quite literally just stepped out the door, and they're testing free agency a little bit here. So that's obviously something you got to pay a lot of attention to. But luckily for them, this free agent class has a lot of, and I mean like a lot, potential replacements for some guys that you might lose or just some guys that you want to add to this group anyway, right? Because if you do, let's say you lose Stephon Gilmore or Shaquille Griffin, you could, there's tons of corners like DJ Reed, Charvarius Ward, Carlton Davis, Rasul Douglas, Asante Samuel, Paulson Adebo, and Mike Hilton is also out there, right? There's so many corner options that the Vikings can explore with a lot of these free agents. And then as safety, the safety could be the same thing. I really like the idea of Javon Holland coming over to Minnesota. I think I think he could be something awesome for them to have on the back end. He has some familiarity with Brian Flores, so that could be something super exciting for them, for him to rejoin his old coach there and that secondary, that very talented defense. I really like that pairing. Or you have a guy like Talanoa Hufanga from the 49ers who's going to be a free agent. He could be on the move as well. Or Trevon Merrick is another one from the Raiders. Young guy, I think he's only 25, 26, that they could also explore if they do lose out on Harrison Smith or Cam Bynum. There's a ton of guys in this free agent class that they could sign. They have the seventh most cap space at $58 million heading into this year, so they got a little space to play around with, of course. So that is going to be something interesting to follow, but also in the draft, right? Like, they're picking at number 24, and around that spot, there could be a lot of exciting prospects, like a Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame. He's probably going to drop a little bit because of that hip injury that he suffered, so he could be just sitting there for them. Or a guy like Jahdae Barron from Texas is another one. Azare Thomas, I hope I said his first name right. The Florida State University corner, who's getting a lot of attention from the Senior Bowl a couple weeks ago, and he's getting a lot of attention, and I'm sure he's going to be there at the later part of the first round. So he would be somebody that would fit in right away. And in terms of safeties, I mean, you got Nick Emenwari from South Carolina, who could be interesting, but I think for safety, I'd rather go like I said, with like a Javon Holland or something like that, and maybe try to bring back Cam Bynum. But yeah, I mean, they're very fortunate that there's a lot of secondary players at their disposal, not only, in the draft and in free agency as well. Maxwell Hairston is another one from Kentucky that a lot of people like, or Siobhan Revel from South Carolina, I believe, as well. There's tons of guys that could be there for the Vikings. So very fortunate that that's a need for them this year, where they could resupply in very good quality if they so choose. But the other spot I wanted to talk about was interior defensive line, maybe like defensive tackle, if you will. But that middle part of the defensive line is going to be important because they got Jalen Redmond, who's going to be a free agent, Jerry Tillery as well, and Jonathan Bullard, who are all going to be free agents. And they all played pretty decent minutes this year. And, with all of them potentially leaving, and the fact that this team got shredded by the Detroit Lions in the last game of the regular season, really by Jahmyr Gibbs, you need to fortify that, like, urgently, I would say, right? So you need, if you can bring two of those guys back, that would be great. But in free agency, we've talked about plenty of options that are out there, like Poona Ford, Oza Adigizua, Milton Williams are the big three that are really in the middle part of that interior defensive line that I'm sure would be very interesting for the Minnesota Vikings to explore. But there's even more options in the draft, right? You got guys like Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, Kenneth Grant from Michigan, Derek Harmon from Oregon, and there's another defensive tackle from Toledo, Darius Alexander, who has gotten a lot of good reviews over his Senior Bowl performance a couple weeks ago as well. So even he could be another option if you want to wait on him, maybe to the second round. So again, another spot where they're very fortunate that, the draft and free agency have a lot of deep classes of secondary players and interior defensive linemen. So these two are the biggest issues I see for the Minnesota Vikings, and I mean, I'm hoping that they're aggressive in both of these instances and get some good guys in there. Like I ideally would like, if I'm the general manager, I would like to bring in Cam Bynum, Javon Holland, and like Milton Williams, let's say. I want to bring Milton Williams and re-sign Jerry Tillery and draft somebody like Derek Harmon in the first round. I think that something along those lines would be fantastic for this team. Of course, the contract negotiations aren't that easy, obviously, but in an ideal world, that's who I'd like to see on the Minnesota Vikings this next year for these positions. So we'll see where they go from here. I mean, they're right there, right? I think that it was very disappointing with how, the performance ended last season, but it doesn't discredit me or make me doubt them anymore. Just because, I mean, yes, it was a bad ending, but I can't ignore, their offense that they have. I really like Kevin O'Connell as a play caller, and defensively, they got some guys like Alex Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard played awesome. So they got a lot of talent on that side, and they're right there, I believe, in a very tough division to kind of play the way they did. I'm confident in them. And the quarterback position, I also have confidence in Kevin O'Connell to get that right. If it's even J.J. McCarthy, I'm really not sweating it too much. I think very highly of J.J. So, yeah, very exciting times, hopefully, for the Minnesota Vikings coming up. But for us on this show, we got one more segment to get to. Just a quick question to everybody before we head to the Super Bowl. Who is under more pressure? Is it the Eagles to win this year, or is it the Kansas City Chiefs chasing history? Very simple question that we're going to answer. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.